A lot of people think they need a better camera or a new lens to get sharper photos, but often the problem isn't the gear. If you have been frustrated by less than sharp photos, these tips might help solve your problem. This video is sponsored by Professional Photographers of America. Join a community of over 33,000 photographers, find equipment, insurance, education, business tools made for small business owners like you. So the first place that we start when I'm working with somebody who's having issues with sharpness is I have them send me a couple images and review, do we have a handle on the focus? Is the focus properly placed? Because often I find out there are parts of their images that are sharp and crisp and in focus, but it's just that those parts aren't where the eye naturally lands. So take this image, for example. The eye naturally wants to rest on the muffin in the front area, but it's not super sharp. So the image doesn't feel sharp. But if you look kind of around the scene, you can see that the area just behind the front of that muffin is intact, sharp focus. This is a case of misplaced focus. So if you review your photos and you look around the scene and suddenly realize, there are areas of the image that are intact, sharp focus, it's just not where the eye naturally lands. So what you're gonna wanna do then is to take some time and really practice and understand the mechanics of how focus works and practice in both manual and autofocus modes. I have an in-depth video on understanding focus. I will link it down below. Highly recommend reviewing that and getting super solid on understanding manual and autofocus modes and practicing both. So moving on to tip number 2, and this is a question for you. Have you ever looked at your LCD screen, swore the image was in focus, when you captured it, you looked at it, looked great, then only later when you went in to edit the photos, then you discovered that the focus was just slightly off? That happens to me all the time. Those LCD screens, they are so small. And so for me, that's why I transitioned to tethered shooting. Why is that? Because when you tether your camera to a computer, you are directly putting the images right into the editing software. You can see them pop up on the computer right away and verify immediately that the focus is where you want it to be. Now, potentially your eyes are better than mine and those LCD screens on the back of the camera are just fine for you. But for those of us who like a larger screen, it just really helps to confirm the focus as well as any other fine details that might have been missed from a smaller screen. Now, if you haven't shot tethered before, check out our introduction to tethering for all the basics on the equipment, the software, and the best practices. But before we get to the next tip, I'm happy to share with you that today's video is sponsored by Professional Photographers of America. If you've been here before, you've heard me talk about Professional Photographers of America and all of the awesome resources that they offer. I've been a member for quite a few years now, but today I want to highlight one of the vital resources for every creator or photographer who wants to make a living doing what they love. And that's PPA's Bridge the Gap curriculum. On top of the 900 plus online educational videos you get access to when you join, there's also this personalized curriculum that helps photographers mend the information gap between being a creative and being an entrepreneur. This content helps you better establish an entrepreneurial mindset with topics like navigating disruption in the industry, learn how to attract the right clients for your business, take control of your sales process and personal branding, and how to market more efficiently within the growing digital landscape. Make sure to follow the link down the description to learn more and get a code for a special discount on your membership so you can join 33,000 other photographers leveling up their businesses. Thanks again to Professional Photographers of America for sponsoring this video. So now let's jump into tip number 3. So maybe you've heard the rule regarding your shutter speed when you are shooting handheld, that you want to make sure that you are working with a shutter speed that is fast enough to freeze a moment so things look crisp and sharp. Because shooting handheld with a slower shutter speed can introduce blur to your scene. So even if you are super duper still, there can still be just a little bit of movement, which can cause blur in your images. And a lot of times this contributes to, again, that feeling that your image is not sharp. So in order to minimize camera shake, you want to make sure that the bottom number in your shutter speed is double your focal length. So for example, if you're using a 50mm lens, the slowest recommended shutter speed would be 1/100th of a second. On a 100mm lens, you want that shutter speed to be approximately 1/200th of a second. That should be fast enough to keep things crisp and sharp when shooting freehand. But now maybe you're using a tripod. You're like, Joni, I got this covered. I've got my camera nice and still because I want to take advantage of slower shutter speeds in lower light situations, right? Because a slower shutter speed helps to brighten your exposure. That's great in dim restaurants, other low light situations, but that requires the camera to be super still. So you pop the camera on a tripod, but just because you're on a tripod doesn't mean your camera is still completely still. Prime example is one of our community members reported having issues with blurry shots, even though she was shooting on a tripod. The problem was when she was physically pressing the shutter button, it was causing the camera to shake, moving ever so slightly. And because she was at a super slow shutter speed, it created blur in her shots. So for her, she switched to shooting tethered. And so then when she pressed the shutter button on her tethering software instead, then the camera wasn't shaking, the images were crisp and sharp. Problem solved. Now, if you don't want to opt for tethering, you can use a remote shutter release like this wireless Yongnuo set that I love. That can also be a great solution. But then there's one more possible issue that a lot of folks don't realize that is contributing to the problems of sharpness and clarity in their images. It's a bigger topic that deserves its own dedicated video, so join me next week. In the next video, we will get into it. Meanwhile, if any of these issues hit home, I encourage you to set some time aside to practice. It's one thing to read about a solution or to watch a YouTube video about it, and a completely other to make it happen. So let's make it happen. Also, remember to click the link down the description box below for a special discount on your membership. With that, thank you so much for stopping by the studio. I hope you have a fantastic day. You stay out of trouble, and I'll see you soon, all right? Bye. And then use the code for a special